Josh Allen, looking deep, going deep.
To me, talking about the Bills, what else would you rather be doing?
We're hoping to add a new dimension to the Cover One network.
Slings it deep downfield, and it's caught inside the 20.
Right now, I just want to talk about this championship level. I've never had a championship caliber team to talk about.
I want to focus more on the storylines each week. What are the big stories going on with the Bills? What are thoughts, commentary? How do these things impact Buffalo?
Deep drop. Deep throw. And it is hauled in for the touchdown.
Allen deep to the end zone and caught for a touchdown.
Play action. Allen. Deep downfield. Wide open.
Welcome into a new edition of the Going Deep podcast. As always, I'm your host, Kevin Masseri, here with Mike Bunt to talk about some actual Bills football. I know this is the time of year that Mike is ready for some actual Bills talk. Some no more hypothetical scenarios, no more dream scenarios during the draft, no more UDFA. Well, still UDFA talk. Mike's not going to be able to get away from that one anytime soon, but lots to talk about. Had a lot of things I wanted to review here. A lot of great news and nuggets coming out last week. Some cuts, some movements on the depth chart, a lot of things to do. And then, also another game coming up here. So even further, a game, to boot 1 p.m. on Saturday. So Mike, how you doing today?
Doing great. Good to finally be able to talk about some real football, live game action. And we have a lot to get to today. So it's going to be a fun episode.
Yeah, for sure. Going to be action-packed as always. There's a lot to go through, a lot of news and nuggets. As always, please smash that like button. That means so much to us to hit that on us. Also, please review on Apple Podcasts. 5 stars there would be excellent as well. But we got to talk about the game first and foremost. Lots to break down. I have some early statistics here that I pulled. We're going to start with a few snap count totals, Mike, and I wanted to see if you were at all shocked, if you want to use that word, by some of the snap totals that happened. And I guess we'll just get into a few of the most notable ones that I was able to come up with. And hopefully, we'll see what you think about them. So first and foremost, at the quarterback position, nothing crazy there. Total split between Case Keenum and Matt Barkley, 32 snaps for Case, 35 for Matt Barkley. The offense was rarely on the field for the first 2 or 2.5 quarters. They had 11 minutes through the first 3 quarters on offense. It wasn't the greatest performance by the offense, but the defense also stayed on the field a long time. The only reason that's relevant is because you wanted to see a few more snaps from, in my opinion, from the second team offense, which we'll get into this weekend as well. But you had an interesting snap count on the running back position. Raheem Blackshear with 24 snaps, Duke Johnson with 27, James Cook with only 7, Zach Moss with 9. Anything there stand out to you, Mike?
Stands out to me basically what I've been saying the last couple of weeks. I think it's 1, 2, 3 Singletary, and then you're going to have Cook and Moss both make this team, and everybody else is just fighting for scraps right now. Assuming Taiwan Jones makes the team, Blackshear, Duke Johnson, they're most likely going to be cut. I do think there's a spot in the practice squad for Blackshear, but to me, this says that they feel pretty confident in Moss and his abilities.
Interesting. So Mike has it locked up. He has his 3 running back room locked up. Obviously, Taiwan Jones as well, which there's been some debate whether he's going to still make the roster as one of the final special teams members to see if they need to utilize a roster spot on Taiwan Jones, who did not play as one of the core special teamers. They know what they're going to get with Taiwan Jones. No reason to need to see him in preseason, as they did with, believe it or not, the majority of their special teams players. Almost all of them generally on their first units did not play as well. So which was a pretty interesting note. They did play Jamison Crowder, a guy who saw 8 snaps in the first series and 1 snap in the second that went off of his hands, and he didn't go back in the game. So that was a pretty interesting snap count that they wouldn't give him another series after that. Khalil Shakir with 35 snaps, had a couple series off in the middle, didn't play in the 6th or 7th series. but came back in and the offense was better. So that was pretty interesting to see someone like Shakir really prove that he was dominant. Not only, I mean, he played really well against the first team Colts defense all the way to the second and the thirds. So lots to like from Khalil Shakir, Mike. And I'm sure, we've all talked about it. He was one of my favorite draft choice. I still believe that he was in consideration in the third round. They went with Terrell Bernard. I do believe that he was a day 2 pick on a lot of draft boards, was a first round pick at some points. I saw him. I still can't find it, but he was mocked to us by an expert in the first round at some point in the pre-draft process. But you're seeing that talent, and it happens quite frequently each year where a 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th round pick just quite frankly always starts to outplay their draft status.
Yeah, Khalil Shakir looks like the real deal, which is nice for us because you and I have been hyping him ever since the Bills selected him. We thought it was a possibility they would look at him. We never thought he'd be a 5th round selection, but good for the Bills to get the value where they took him. I thought the wide receiver splits were interesting because, and we'll get into this more later in the show, especially when you bring up Isaiah Hodgins, due to the fact that, Crowder played the game, which basically says Isaiah McKenzie probably firmly has that slot 3 position locked down, but Crowder only played a few series. To me, that's saying they still feel pretty confident he's going to have a role on this team. I know people have brought him up as a cut possibility, especially with the way Khalil Shakir has played, because they think he could be replaced by Shakir, and that would make room for Hodgins as the 6 or the 7. To me, seeing Crowder play only a few series tells me the Bills, they're easing him back in, and they still feel pretty firm about him making this squad. Kumaro, looking at his series, obviously he's not the greatest wide receiver in the world, and you could argue what value does he really bring to special teams, but I think based on what we've seen with this regime in the past, Kumaro was probably going to be close to a lock to making this team as well. Maybe I'm wrong on that, but I feel strong about Kumaro making this team. And then looking at the rest of the wide receivers, it really comes down to do they have a 7th wideout for Isaiah Hodgins? He played the majority of the game, didn't get the start, but played the majority of the game, and he looked very solid. But he also did it against backups the entire time. Are we going to see Isaiah Hodgins get some opportunities with the ones this week against the Broncos? And will he be able to step up with that opportunity if given? Because that's really when we're going to see, can he really make a mark on this team? It doesn't matter what he's doing in the 4th quarter against 3rd stringers. What matters is, can he produce against the top players in the NFL, which is what you would do if you want him to actually make this team and not just be a healthy scratch every single week. So we'll talk more about that later in the show, but that's an interesting topic to see where you are, because I do think I had a tweet on Saturday at the time that said I didn't think going into camp Hodgins had a chance of making the team, but he was starting to convince me otherwise. But I still didn't think the numbers favored him, and now I think I've changed my point of view a little bit. I think he has a better than 50-50 chance of making it, but I don't think it's anywhere near lock and stone. But we'll get to that later.
Yeah, I mean, how does special teams change this year? We've had just usually the same special teams coordinator in Heath Farwell over the past few years. Now it's changed to Smiley. Will that affect anything with roster keeps? And a good point. I'm sure we'll talk a little bit about punter. Will that change what happens on what special teams players that you keep? That's quite frankly a really interesting debate. One that I've always believed in, when you're able to kick it through the end zone like you did in the playoffs. If you're going to kick it through the end zone in the divisional round when it matters the most, why does it matter to have certain special teams coverage units? You shouldn't dedicate as many spots to the unit. So to me, I am not opposed to releasing players that aren't as good on their position groups because they play special teams. So to me, it just depends where the precedent is with your organization. If you have a punter that has a big leg, don't forget though, that could mean you're covering more based on some of the downfalls of Matt Arise. It could be he outkicks his coverage, right? That's what one of the biggest things that the deniers were saying was, well, is that really a good thing that he, there was no one within like 27 yards of the returner? that he could have very easily had caused some damage on the return. So that was a debate, and we'll get into some more special teams.
I do want to talk about that debate because I think it's a silly debate. I understand what the logic to it is. And what's up, Greg? Nice to have you watching. That debate it's silly to me because, first of all, it totally takes away the context that Matt Araiza booted that 15 yards past the punt returner on Saturday. So there was no way he was going to catch the ball. Even with the separation, he wasn't getting to it.
Right.
And it also fails to take into account a punter can adjust to the returner just as easily as a quarterback can adjust to an opposing defense. If a returner wants to play you deep as an adjustment, boot it up higher, get more hang time, angle it out of bounds. That'll force returners to come in, and then you boot it over their head. I'm not saying it's as simple as that, but it's not like a guy that can punt the ball 50 yards can't do anything else. This guy knows how to punt a football. He can adjust and do different things. And to say, oh, every time he's just going to kick it with 30-yard separation between the returner and your gunners, it's just ridiculous in my opinion. But hey, that's where we're at.
Yeah, there's strategy there that unfortunately it makes the returner think. The last thing that a returner ever wants to have to do is think. That's all repetition. That's more balls that end up on the ground if they have to actually make bigger strategy decisions when they're standing back there with a 60-yard punt coming at them. We've seen even some of the best people falter in that situation. Even Isaiah McKenzie, the current slot receiver of the Buffalo Bills right now, by all accounts, it's his slot job. At times he struggles returning the football. There's a lot that goes into that. It's not just let me stand back further so that I don't get my kicked over my head.
And good luck catching punts in December in Buffalo, especially now that you have this guy in town who can boom it. I mean, I'm not expecting every time Araiza punts it to be a 60-yarder or something crazy, but this is, as many have said, a weapon in your punt game now. It's a weird to define a punter as a weapon, but he brings another dimension to the game. And yeah, maybe he has some weaknesses. His hang time wasn't amazing in college. Yes, he probably has to work on his finesse a little bit, and then also address the handling situation. But those are all things you can work on. And I am not worried about a touchback when you punt it 82 yards for a 62-yard net. You are never going to get me to worry about a 62-yard net punt. Anybody that's critical of that, get out.
Yeah, and I mean, it was a couple as a punter, it was a couple bounces away from being like a 75-yard net. Like, I mean, it wasn't guaranteed that ball went through the end zone either. If that has a little spin on it and he knows what he's doing, that ball's down inside the 10. And even furthering the net average. And that's coming from a team that had a net average in the 30s with Matt Hawk. So, like, I mean, quite frankly, so sometimes one gets returned for a net of 45 or a net of 43. I mean, that's still decent and gives more ability for a player to put the ball on the ground. So, to me, I don't see the problem. Okay, let's say he was able to get 10, 15, 17-yard return.
Yeah. That's not a big deal because you're still booming your punts. And the thing about it, too, is say the Bills do allow a couple long returns this year, 50, 60 yards, whatever, or they allow a touchdown. I trust that the Bills' offense and their defense is going to be strong enough to where that will most likely not kill them against most opponents. Yes, it's not something you want to risk. But as Ken Dorsey said earlier, sometimes when you're stuck inside your 10, 15-yard line, you punt the ball, you normally assume the other team's going to get it with great field position. With a guy like Matt Araiza, you don't know if that's going to be the case. Right. I take that over just the 35-yard net, give it to them at the 50.
Yeah, and one thing that's interesting too, I mean, Greg chimes in with the 54th. I actually with Greg that I believe I have Hodgins still slightly on his way out. I think he needs a little bit more to bounce his way to elevate to the final roster spot. And maybe that was Marquez Stevenson as the final piece to the puzzle to really push his way on. I don't think it's just as easy as like he's the 7th receiver, so they're going to roster him. He's still in competition to what they want to do with all their special teams players. So to me, I don't believe that Isaiah Hodgins is a lock for the 54th position, which is still off the roster. I do think he's got a little bit to go to get ahead and to still make it onto the roster with only roughly 2+ weeks left to do so. It's going to be quite frankly pretty interesting. And Kumaro is definitely one of their lock special teamers. The fact that he did play, though, is interesting to me because that shows you that he could be more on the bubble than once thought. So to me, I thought Jake Kumaro was a lock. They wanted to prove that he could play receiver. And unfortunately, he hasn't shown much since he left Aaron Rodgers on the receiving end, beside one play against Denver a few years ago.
Here's my thought, though. So Kumaro, obviously, the reason he makes this team is because of special teams. If they got rid of him, would it be a tremendous value that you're losing? I don't think so. I think you can move on from him and be okay. But thinking the way the Bills coaching staff thinks, that's why he's going to make this team. Sure. And as a wide receiver, it's also important to put into context. He started the game on Saturday. And granted, we know he's not going to be in situations where he's going to start in the regular season. But going up in those first couple series is a lot different than playing in the third, fourth quarter against the third stringers. That was when Isaiah Hodgins went off. We saw Kumaro in the preseason last year, and we saw him in some regular season games. He might not be a great wide receiver, but he is capable of making plays. He had a sloppy fumble on Saturday, but I don't think it's as cut and dry as Isaiah Hodgins is a way better wide receiver than Kumaro, and Kumaro's only making it due to special teams. No, Kumaro got the start at wide receiver. Hodgins didn't. Kumaro is ahead of him on the depth chart, and he has actually played in NFL games and has an NFL touchdown reception from Josh Allen. Let's see what Hodgins does against starters if he gets the opportunity this week before we anoint him over a player like Kumaro. Because I think right now we're looking at stats. In the preseason, you can't judge based on stats. You have to look at situations. Who are they going up against? There's a lot of different factors at play. Like I said, right now, I'm leaning a little bit more than 50-50 that Hodgins might make the team, but there's a lot of factors that come into it. Typically, Brandon Beane and Sean McDermott don't like to go into a season with 7 wideouts. They did have 7 once Marquez Stevenson was activated last year, but going into a season with 7, that's not something that they normally do. And if you have a guy like Hodgins as your 7th, assuming that's the case and they don't cut Kumaro or Crowder and make a bold move like that, who's missing out on that 53rd spot? Are you cutting a guy like Balin Spector, who just impressed a lot of people over the weekend? Are you cutting another quality player? These are the hard decisions that you got to make, but it's definitely more 50-50 than 100% lock or no chance.
Well, what's to me, I mean, we appreciate the Ravens listeners too that are coming on about week 4 matchups already. We'll definitely be interested. I'll have a Ravens guest that I have on the show. I'm leaning toward Lockdown Ravens with Kevin. He's a really good guest for that game in week 4. But to me, I think personally, I liked Isaiah Likely as a prospect in Buffalo. He was a guy that, had they kept their 4th round pick, quite frankly, was one of my top targets there, and Khalil Shakir, who they later did take, but that would have been my top 2 targets. And quite frankly, they went 10 picks apart. So, if the NFL is not ready for Isaiah Likely, then the NFL is certainly not ready for an offense, including Khalil Shakir and further weapons. To me, the Ravens don't have any receivers. And until they address it, I'm not scared of that team. They went in and scored 3 points in the playoffs. And the Bills roster to me is better than that, than they were that day. So quite frankly, I'm not at this moment worried about Rashad Bateman and a couple of the other Ravens receivers at this moment.
I respect them more than you, Kev. I respect the Ravens more than you do. Last year was an accident. They suffered a lot of injuries. They went up against a perfect storm. Lamar Jackson got hurt late. Joe Burrow got hot. The Ravens are better than what their record was last year. Their main issues in recent years has been failing to show up when it matters the most in the postseason. I still feel like this Ravens team could easily win the AFC North this year. Are they competition for the Bills? We'll see. If we get the Lamar Jackson of his first couple years starting, they could still be dynamic, but they have to prove themselves before they get up to that mantle of where the Bills are, where the Chiefs are, and even the Bengals are now, because the Bengals are defending AFC champions. So But I definitely do not take the Ravens for granted.
Yeah, I don't take the Dolphins for granted, but you can't, because beside the Bills totally annihilating them every time they play them, I don't take really many teams, even the Jaguars for.
We learned better.
So yes, I don't take them. I'm just looking at it from a big picture perspective, and that's all we can talk about today on August 16th when the game's 6 weeks away. That an offense with Devin Duvernay and James Prochet and Benjamin Victor and Tylan Wallace, they don't. And that's their receiving room. Like, to me, like, I think you need to move the ball better against the Bills than that. And a bunch of running back coming off of injuries. Gus Edwards is still on PUP. But anyways, we will definitely dissect that game week 4. And it is a good one. It is definitely at least a very good game, but there's still plenty to talk about from this past week. And I like the point that the Bills need to develop special teamers. As I just stated earlier, they need to do something that doesn't always roster Tywan Jones. It doesn't always roster Matakevich. It doesn't always roster some of the positions, Jake Kumaro, that you need to have and take rosters. To me, it's not even about the money that those players are owed, because you can always bring them back at 1 for 1.5. Matthew Slater is one of the best in the league and still barely sees over $2 million ever, as one of the best special teamers to maybe ever, one of the best special teamers ever. And Tywan Jones keeps signing basically vet minimum deals in his career. So I'm not as worried about the money side of it as I am, like, at some point the Bills have a lot of expensive players in general, and you need to have developing backup players developing behind them to play their positions and not need to dedicate those roster spots. Just as a really equal example, Elijah Griffin is a guy you caught and immediately was claimed to the Giants. Now, that's not one I'm overly worried about, but that could happen to where you need to have someone like that on your roster, but you have 3 or 4 guys that you're keeping for special teams only. But if you look at special teams, the Bills are here to win now, Mike. They're not here to win in 4 years. They're not developing the farm. They're not the Baltimore Orioles. They're very interested in today. And does Tywan Jones and Jake Kumaro and Tyler Matakevich get the Bills closer to that goal than Elijah Griffin, or then even some other Nick McLeod, or some other developmental backup defensive backs, or even my guy Raheem Blackshear? Those special teamers get them to the point a little bit earlier than some of those developmental guys that you would roster with those spots. And you don't always develop just because you're big and fast and athletic does not mean you're good at special teams. It's a trait. So just like holding, like you have a holder, just like you have a long snapper. Those are special skill sets. Same thing on special teams. Just because you're young or you're athletic or you're fast doesn't mean that you have that instinct that you can play teams. So they can't just say, yeah, we have Dodson. Dodson's going to replace Matakevich. Or yes, Spector, a guy I liked and I praised post-draft about a guy I thought was closer to the roster than many also did, kind of like Hodgins. To me, Mike, you can't just say, I'm just going to take a XYZ linebacker that I kind of like and plug him in to save a couple bucks and open up a roster spot.
And that's why the Bills don't do that. It'd be great if the Bills could have quality backups that you knew could be special teams aces. It'd be great, because then you wouldn't need to invest money in the Tywan Jones, the Tyler Matakeviches, and so forth. But you hit it on the nail. Special teams players are a special breed. There's a reason why those guys are still in the NFL for years when they don't have much of an impact on the defensive side of the ball or the offensive side of the ball. And it's because they are so good at what they do. And you need to have that special mindset. And they carve out their NFL niche doing that. I think a lot of times if you're a young player and maybe you don't see your opportunity coming at a defensive position or an offensive position, that's how you end up staying in the NFL. You got to wonder what percentage of backups want to be a special teams ace their entire career. They want to be that starting linebacker. They want to be the starting running back, and because that's where the money's at, and that's where the notoriety and the impact that a lot of people would perceive is at. But yeah, it'd be great if the Bills could get some backups to step up and develop them. But history would tell us that the Bills are probably going to continue to value these special teams aces and continue to invest in them. Maybe it won't be the same amount of money that they're paying guys like that now, but I would reckon that going forward, the names are going to change, but they're still going to be going after special teams guys that are priority special teams and not good backups that can do special teams. And we chat about this a lot in the Cover One messages and all that stuff. Some of the best coaches in NFL history have had special teams backgrounds or prioritize special teams to a high degree. Look at Bill Belichick. He's a guy that values that stuff. Bill Parcells, the list goes on and on. So it's hard for fans and myself to sometimes prioritize special teams because it's, even though we hear it's 1/3 of the game, we know it's the plays that you don't really think matter too much. And the NFL has devalued special teams a lot in the past decade, but to coaches, it still holds a significant role, and they're not going to just throw it out the door like some of us might wish.
And Tyler Matakevich is one of the best to do it. He's not just average. He's not above average at it. He's paid to be one of the best special teamers in the league, and he is. And if the Bills want to move away from that, totally Sean McDermott's decision to do so. I don't think he will lean that way, Mike. I don't think he will be, this will be the year he does that. It's possible, though. Maybe they see something with their punt game, the return game. Maybe they have a strategy to where generally they'll kick it deep on both of those, out of bounds, limit returns, and maybe they will decide this is the year they do roster Hodgins, Spector, and others, Blackshear, whoever, in order, no Tywan Jones, whoever, in order to roster some of those guys. It's not outlandish, but I don't believe that he is leaning toward that model where he's always had, Matakevich is making $3.25 million against the cap this year. It's one of the largest caps of a special teamer in the league. And quite frankly, I don't believe he's great at his position. I mean, he's okay at it. He's a guy that in a pinch, and he has played a little bit at linebacker position, but he's the best. He's there to play special teams. He's there to be an ace and to lead the league in a lot of special teams categories. And that's why you're paying him $3.2 million. And we'll know in about 2 weeks if the Bills decide that that's not the move that they want to do. And they'll save $2.5 million against the cap if they want to bank that for next year. If they want to roll it into Poyer, if they want to assign Odell Beckham Jr., who we've talked about a couple times on this show now. Sure, there are different things that they can do if they determine that they need a roster spot for Odell Beckham Jr. and they need Dodson to play primarily special teams that he already does. Then yes, then at that point, the Bills are making moves. They are saying that the risk of cutting one of the best special teamers in the league is not as the risk of that. They would prefer to have the roster spot. Yeah. So they can make that determination. I don't expect that to be this year, but it's not crazy.
And this is all what takes place in constructing a roster. You have to make difficult decisions. Not every move you make is going to be something that you want to do. But unfortunately, when salary cap league, you're going to have to get rid of decent players at times. And you look at who the Bills potentially might cut, the final guys. Just because the Bills are going to cut some decent players doesn't mean other teams are going to instantly claim their guys. Oftentimes we have this conversation every August about, we have to keep this guy on the team because if we cut him, another team is going to claim him. And then they end up getting cut. And a couple days later, they sneak onto your practice squad. Every team in the NFL, every fan base in the NFL has guys that they overvalue or feel like they could be that next impact guy. And yet every September, we have those guys sneaking onto practice squads. Yes, the Bills could cut a guy like Isaiah Hodgins and he could get claimed by another team. But is that a reason just to keep him on your roster because of the threat someone else could claim him? To me, no, unless you truly believe there is something special there long term. When you're talking about a 7th wide receiver, a 6th wide receiver who's 3rd year in the league, and I'm only using Hodgins as an example. We could be talking Balin Spector. We could be talking about any player in their first 2-3 years in the league that you spent time to develop or a draft pick on. You know what? Other organizations have guys that fit that exact same mold. And if you do lose a guy that you think is a quality player to get claimed by another team, you still have the ability to claim players from other teams that are going to be cut. So it's not like you lose out in every single one of these examples. And if your team is really hurt that much by cutting a 7th round draft pick or a 5th corner or a 3rd tight end or a 10th lineman, well, then you're probably not that good of a team anyway at that point. So what's the whole point of even freaking out about it? Like we all talk about Wyatt Teller and how he was traded to Cleveland. And you know what? sometimes things like that are going to happen. You might have a diamond in the rough that you just misevaluated because of the way the roster was constructed at the time, and you just take what you can get or you cut your losses. And yeah, it sucks, but you're going to miss sometimes. You're not going to hit on every single roster decision you make. So yeah, I hope the Bills do a great job come cutdown day, but there's a lot of different ways that they could attack this. And I don't think necessarily one way or another way is right or wrong. It's just, how do they want this team to look come the start of the regular season?
Right. And one of the best points, I prefer to have Blackshear make the roster as well. I've liked him from the day they signed him, was one of my favorite UDFAs. But just when the Bills waive him, I still think that they probably still feel pretty comfortable he could be a priority UDFA. I still think that they would want him to develop further and only go to him in case of a call-up or an injury to their running back room. I don't believe that they would feel the need to cut special teams, the ability on special teams to roster him because they need this. The only reason you would do that is because you feel like someone would claim him. I feel like Brandon Beane would have a good pulse.
I like Blackshear. You were right on the dot with him. You've been singing his praises since the moment they picked him up as an undrafted free agent. He's looked good. It would be nice if he got some run with the Bills, but I feel like he's safely on the practice squad.
What's interesting for him is it's not Taiwan Jones he's competing against. It's something happening to Zach Moss or even James Cook, even more so James Cook, something happening to him in preseason or beyond. Yeah. He'd immediately be one of the immediate considerations to fill that roster spot if the Bills don't go and get someone higher named. Immediately, Raheem Blackshear is on the roster. It's not necessarily, I don't believe it's a Taiwan Jones versus Raheem Blackshear argument. The Bills could make it that. I don't see them doing that. That's not who Taiwan Jones is competing against. Taiwan Jones is competing against maybe being replaced by an up-and-coming special teamer or other, but he's one of the best gunners, special teamers in the league. Unless the Bills really feel like there's someone that's close, I wouldn't feel that they would make that move. But it isn't competing with Raheem Blackshear, who, in my opinion, is a guy that's really competing against Moss and Singletary and Cook aren't going anywhere. But so really is only competing against Moss.
And to even say competing at this point is difficult when you have Moss play 3 series or something like that, and you have Raheem Blackshear playing to the end of the game. Right. But these are good moments for a guy like Blackshear to get 2 touchdowns, even if it doesn't work out on the Bills. He's getting NFL tape out there. His 2 yak catches back to back were really impressive on Saturday, making guys miss, getting additional yardage. Regardless of where it works out for him, that's how you earn future opportunities down the line. So whether or not it's in Buffalo, good for him to have that type of performance in his NFL debut. And that's going to go quite a ways to helping him establish himself in the NFL.
Absolutely, Mike. So to me, it's a matter of just because, and the Bills got really you're scared to lose players in the waiver wire. And maybe if they have a pulse on something with Blackshear, then maybe you have to be creative. If they have a sense, like someone's texting people inside their office or finding out hey, you're moving from Blackshear, maybe at that point they need to think a little bit careful about Benford instead. For instance.
That's a good comparison.
Then maybe you do. Maybe you have to consider, okay, I got to stash him, because he's going to get claimed. Let's put him on the roster for now, and we'll figure it out later via injury. But unless you have a good pulse on that, you would feel pretty good about him being onto the practice squad. And they did kind of misplay Teller, but they also drafted him and also got a good trade value for him, which later went to Josh Allen. So yes, there was some miss there, but at the same time, they did cash out. It wasn't a complete cut. Yes, it wasn't the world's strongest pick package. It was something that they felt at the time was more than what they drafted him for. And that's what you're doing generally in the NFL is taking an asset, using a draft pick, and getting more for that player than that you drafted them for, whether it's an extra pick, whether it's a second contract, whether it's way playing above their draft status. Any of those things are wins. The Bills felt like they had a win, and Teller just went and developed into one of the best guards in the league. They drafted him, though. That draft class is still one of the best. The back-to-back draft classes that they had in 17 and 18 are remarkable, and that's why the Bills are as good as they are. So bad in the draft prior to that, except for a few players here and there. But how good they've been drafting. And look at this class. Is there a rock stud solid star? We don't know yet. We don't know if they're going to have a top all-pro or a top 50 NFL player on the top 100 list. We do know that right now, the 2022 class is looking mighty good and looking mighty good against the 1s and the 2s of other teams. So Right now, that including, Benford, a guy who could be a corner 2 in this league, Ariza, who could be one of the best punters in the league. You just taught Khalil Shakir, who could easily come in and play both inside and out. A lot of people are like, who's the outside receiver if Gabe Davis goes down? It's Khalil Shakir is your number one backup right now, unless they do make a move with an Odell Beckham Jr. down the road. Your number one player right now in game for the first at least 8 weeks is Khalil Shakir, is who's going to be playing alongside Stephon Diggs or alongside Gabriel Davis if one of those players goes down. So, and Shakir has shown he can play inside and out as a 5th round pick, an immense value. And then obviously, we're going to see, we've already seen a touchdown from Terrell Bernard, special teams, still has some learning to do, but he's a fun player to root for. James Cook still has some to show us. And then Kaiir Elam has flashed his 1st round potential already. And there's some good things on the horizon. And those are players on a really good Bills roster. These aren't Dick Duran rosters. These are players that are flashing on a roster of Super Bowl talent. So that really does speak to how good this regime is at stockpiling scouts, at putting together, one of the best executive staffs and getting the draft right. So yes, when you have good players, you're going to have some that don't make the team. And the Bills started to finally see that last year. They did lose like Nick McLeod, and they lost a couple others to the Jets. Wild Goose, they lost a couple to the Jets in their guard as well. So yes, they did start to lose some of those players for the first time ever. So it's starting to finally happen to where the Bills need to kind of think about it a little bit as they cut players. Yeah, and it happens.
When you're a good team, other teams are gonna want to poach you. And I guess the best thing about these draft classes too, Kev, and you've been spot on, not only are we seeing flashes from these guys, but they're going to be given the time to develop properly. They're not going to be thrown into situations where they're expected to produce at an elite level right away, outside of a few exceptions. Obviously, Kaiir Elam is going to have high hopes going into this year, and James Cook, a lot of people are going to be expecting big things from him. But you look at the rest of the draft class from this year: Terrell Bernard, Khalil Shakir, Balin Spector, Christian Benford. They're not going to be expected to be immediate impact players. Now, that's not saying that they're not going to make good plays at times and show some flashes, because they all have the ability to. But the Bills can go slower with them and have them learn from those in front of them. I think Terrell Bernard is getting a great opportunity learning from Matt Milano and Tremaine Edmonds. Then you have Khalil Shakir. He's been probably in my opinion, the biggest, most exciting thing I've seen from this offense during camp in the preseason. He has flashed all of camp. And then first preseason game, he goes for 92 yards. Khalil Shakir is showing me he's the real deal. But unless the Bills make a move with one of their top 4 wideouts, he's not going to make a huge impact this year, at least right out of the gate. Maybe midseason there's an injury or something happens and he gets an opportunity. But right now, Khalil Shakir is going to have time. And then maybe next year he gets elevated to a bigger role. Christian Benford, who we're seeing his a strong Raz out of Villanova, he's been the surprise of camp from, can you believe this guy can play? We go into camp thinking Benford, well, he'll be lucky to make the roster. We're talking about him as a guy that's a stone cold lock at this point. That's incredible. And then Balin Spector, who a lot of people entering Saturday's preseason game was considered a guy on the outside looking in, goes for, 10 tackles all over the field. And now you're going to have some tough decisions. Do you move on from a Balin Spector, a 7th round pick, or do you somehow find a way to sneak him onto the final spot of the roster, or try to hope no one snatches him from your practice squad? These are good problems to have. When you're having these difficult decisions, it means you got competition. And that's what Sean McDermott and Brandon Beane were all about since day one coming to Buffalo. They first cut out the bait that they didn't like from the previous regime, and then it was building competition at every position. You build that competition, you get the best out of your players, and that's why the Bills, outside of Josh Allen, obviously, that's one of the big reasons why the Bills are where they are today.
And Mike, another guy I really liked was Balin Spector on the end of the draft. His RAS 9.13 has that athletic profile, 4.640, 2.6820, 1.5710. I mean, he does everything you need him to do. The vertical's good. The broad jump's good. He has that explosion grade, the agility grade. He is somebody that, and then top of that, it wasn't just at a D3 college. You put that into one of the best tandem defenses in college football in Clemson as part of the Bash Brothers. So to me, Balin Spector was a guy that for a late round flyer was always going to be very interesting to add to the depth of the linebacker room. And the Bills may have known Andre Smith was on suspension, that quite frankly, is a guy that has a path to this roster. And right now he's on the roster for me. I don't believe you let a guy with this athletic profile, you drafted him. He's shown to play well in preseason. He is a guy to me, if you're picking somebody that could get claimed, and I'm once again, big Raheem Blackshear fan. To me though, Balin Spector is a guy that and linebacker is a position that gets plucked. So to me, I don't know that you can pass him through waivers. He would be kind of at the top of the list for another team to go and claim because Balin Spector, quite frankly, has the draft profile, he has the pedigree, and he has the RAS score to go to boot, and now he's showing some stuff in preseason. That's enough of a package for a poor team to say, let me go and claim Balin Spector and then give him some time here. So
that RAS is unbelievable. A 9.13. We've talked to Kent Lee about how these RAS scores come together. A 9.13, you are an elite. You're an elite athlete. The only thing off of Balin Spector from an actual athleticism standpoint is just that he's short. He's a small guy from a height perspective. And we saw the same thing with Terrell Bernard, is a little bit of a smaller guy for being a linebacker. But this is also the new mold of linebacker going forward in the NFL. As teams continue to pass it at a high rate, you need to adjust. And these are the type of linebackers that Brandon Beane is going after for the ever-evolving NFL. And it's encouraging because the Bills are ahead of the curve with this type of stuff. And the fact that we're seeing Bernard flash, Spector flash, it's just a tremendous start for this defense and Beane draft class overall.
And then thanks, Tim, for appreciate the super chat there on Spector. Yeah, he did. He does. And as we break down film further, he needs to be able to make sure that he's not buying on that play fake, those play actions. And to me, yes, he's going in coverage in general. He has some work to do, but that athletic profile shows the Bills and Leslie Frazier and Sean McDermott that there's something there that you can work with to overcome some of those. And the Bills obviously think that he's able to bite into that. But quite frankly, as a run stopper, as the ability to right now hopefully play special teams, he's a guy that you hope can translate to special teams and Spector, because that's his way to for sure lock his roster spot down, at least in the first year. And that's exactly what they're hoping for, that he's able to do on the special teams front, that he can show enough there that the Bills can roster him. And he was one of my favorite late round picks of the Bills. I was not as high on Luke Tenuta. Admittedly, I didn't know what Benford could do. He got his hands on a lot of balls, but I was interested to see how Villanova would translate to the NFL. But when it comes to Balin Spector, he was a guy right off the bat that I was like, what the depth at the Bills linebacking position outside of their starters, there's a path to the roster, especially post Andre Smith injury. I do like what he's able to do and what he's able to bring to the table. And then once I researched more of his athletic profile and some of his film, I realized that Spector, quite frankly, right off the bat, was going to make a real play for the roster early on. And that's why I really liked him. And then I liked what I saw similarly to Raheem Blackshear and his Virginia Tech tape and some of the things he was able to do out of the backfield, and the Bills trying to find that pass catching back and that yak. And Raheem Blackshear is a really cheap version in order to do so. I do think that the one benefit you would have if you ever considered rostering Raheem Blackshear or even a Balin Spector would be they're on minimum deals for 3 years in his case, in Raheem Blackshear's, and 4 years in Spector's case. So there is some benefit originally to them rostering those type of individuals, especially if the running back room next year might not have a lot of players there in terms of having to go away from Devin Singletary on a contract year. Moss only have 1 year left after next year. So there'll be some movement there. There's definitely some roster plays that can be had by keeping a guy, making sure you keep Spector and making sure you keep Raheem Blackshear on the roster. I don't anticipate Blackshear making the roster yet, but I do believe that there could be a path if things bounce a certain way down the road, and the Bills feel like he put enough on tape in his receiving game and his grit and determination, I do believe that the Bills could make sure that a guy like Blackshear doesn't go to waivers, or more so, Balin Spector doesn't go along to waivers. So I do believe that there's a lot that could bounce their way in terms of how this roster plays out. But next, guys, I really need to take a minute to mention Underdog Fantasy, one of the best fantasy apps out there. Please take some time to check it out if you're looking to add a fantasy league, season-long leagues. You can join in any type of risk factor you're willing to take, and they'll match up to $100 using promo code Cover1. Really fun. I'm in a bunch myself. I've already done a few drafts. Slow drafts are fun. Fast drafts. Get out there, and lots of ways to play fantasy. And I love Underdog as a way to supplement kind of what I'm doing out there with all of my different fantasy apps. I do have that one on my home screen, and it's super fun to be able to utilize that to set my lineups, to kind of supplement the other leagues that I'm in. So please use promo code Cover1 to match up to $100 of free play on that website. Really fun to get out there, and make sure you download Underdog Fantasy. It is really cool. It isn't like a traditional any other traditional app that you may be used to in the sports world. But Mike, oh man, lots to go, lots to still go here. And we're already 45 minutes in. We appreciate everybody from tuning in. Please hit the like button for us. That helps us continue to bring great content and continue to do what we need to do. And 5 stars on Apple Podcasts for all of our listeners listening offline. We really appreciate everybody tuning in on Apple Podcast, Spotify, any way that you're listening. I did see a comment that I really liked that I wanted to touch on, and that was the ability to know, like, how do you know if someone's good in the special teams factor? And that's interesting to me, is like, what type of statistics are there to say, like, is this player really good at special teams, especially to take a spot away from a Balin Spector or away from somebody else on the roster? And I really appreciated that question. And there are a lot of advanced statistics that show, coverage rate, tackle percentage, things that, how often is he making a tackle when he's covering a kick? Quite frankly, how effective is that player when they're on special teams? Like, is he just running down the field and kind of, kneeing in the end zone when he's, the guy knees the ball down? Or is he actually being productive on the special teams unit? And there are a few advanced analytics, and Tyler Matakevich is one of the best in all of those figures across advanced analytics at the special teams unit. And that's why he's making $3.25 million against the cap this year. So yes, there are ways to measure it. They are advanced analytics for it. Is it something revolutionary? No, but it's stuff like tackle percentage. It's stuff like how often, a kick gets returned to their side, the return yardage from his lane, things such as those that can be taken into account. If they're double teamed, if a return unit designates, just like you do on defense, if you designate, we need to make sure we get in front of Matakevich, that is accounted for as well to free up other players from making a free shot on the returner. So there are some advanced analytics. So I wanted to make sure I address that, Mike, as being a key cog in this wheel of the special teams battle with offense and defense. We haven't talked about defense, Mike, and we need to kind of turn there for a minute here and kind of look at some of those numbers and statistics. And the defensive line dominance. We saw the footage of Tim Settle absolutely just walking back one of the best guards in the league. We're not talking about a second teamer. We're not talking about, someone's practice squad play. We're talking about one of the best guards in Quentin Nelson in the entire league. So that was really cool footage to see what this Bills defense could do from that standpoint. And quite frankly, right now, he's the number one off the bench. He's not even technically, if you go by the paperwork, not technically a starter, Mike.
Yeah, there's a lot of high hopes for Settle. Even when he came in, a lot of the instant reaction was this was a guy that was underused while in Washington. And if you give him an opportunity, he can really explode. Great rusher from the inside. And I think we saw some of that, like you just said, against the Colts in a limited sample on Saturday. And this defensive line is one of the most improved parts of the entire Bills roster. They might not have the big star names. Obviously, Von Miller is a star. That's a great addition. Ed Oliver is great. But the guys that they brought in this offseason beyond them, Settle's going to make an impact. In him being a backup just gives you even more strength beyond your starting unit. To have Jordan Phillips back in the fold, that's a quality addition. We saw a flash from Boogie Basham over the weekend, the strip sack. That's what you want to see. Boogie Basham, we forget, second-round pick. There's expectation for him to be a solid contributor on this team. I feel like there's a portion of the fan base that's given up on him due to some of the additions to the defensive line in the past offseason. But Boogie Basham still has the ability to step up this season. AJ Epineza, are we going to see that growth that we're all desperately hoping to see? There's some things in AJ's game that are encouraging. We just haven't seen it during regular action, unfortunately. And you even want to go further, you have insurance and Shaq Lawson, where if something was to happen to Boogie, to AJ, to Groot, any of them, you still have the solid depth. And obviously, Greg Rousseau, I haven't even mentioned him. There's a lot of expectations for him to take a tremendous leap this season. You're hearing everybody say positive things about him. Von Miller, a tremendous mentor for Gregory Rousseau. It seems like Ed Oliver is loving the relationship that he's formed with Von Miller. This D-line, on paper, looks like it should be nasty. And I haven't even mentioned Daquan Jones yet. So what does that tell you? I mean, I obviously miss Harrison Phillips just like the rest of the fan base does. But you cannot look at this D-line and not be excited about it. And that's going to just make things that much easier for the rest of the defense. We're already confident in the linebackers. We know that they have the best safety tandem in the NFL. And you got Trey White, when healthy, one of the best corners in the league. This D-line plays the way that I expect them to. Good luck to opposing offenses. I've said it all offseason. I'm going to continue to say it now. This defense is nasty.
And the defensive line in particular might finally, we've said it before during preseason and even when it was starting to get put together, that maybe it's finally going to click with all the different pieces. It hasn't to this point. It's been okay, and it showed some good pressure rates, top 5 in a lot of advanced statistics, and we're like, we need sacks. We need to see this. We need to see that. And I agree. Like at some point, I do like advanced analytics. I like special teams advanced analytics. I like pressure rates. But at some point, I got to see the quarterback go to the ground. Like I do. Like, I mean, just like in any sport, in anything, you could have great on-base percentage in baseball, but it needs to translate. Like you need to get runs. You need to translate it into something. At some point, like you could have really good FIP and BIP and BOP, but you need to translate that into production. And it didn't always feel like that at the Bills defensive line last year, where everyone was saying, and us included, like there are some great advanced analytics here, we promise, but then it doesn't show. So at some point, like we call it nerd test and eye test. And to me, like the eye test wasn't passing the nerd test. And you knew there is a balance there. And I think the Bills knew that. The Bills were like, on the nerd front, on the advanced analytics front, we look good. But ultimately, we do need to see some splashier plays, even as a Frazier's used those terms. It isn't just us talking about it. We do need to see some splashier plays. Just straight up, there were times in the Bills defense during the stretches of the middle of the season, right before they got a little bit hotter at the end of the year. There were times that it was poor on the defensive effort in terms of splash plays and in terms of big plays. So there was definitely stretches there that the Bills needed to take a step. And I think that they put together a unit that's able to do so. And that's not even to mention, I've seen Brandon Bryant here already mentioned, and I've seen a couple of other players, Kingsley Jonathan, Prince Emili, a guy that showed out, was quite around the ball all the time. And other names, CJ Brewer was a guy I saw get in there on plays. Just guys you wouldn't even think of that definitely have a shot at the practice squad. And guys like Emili, who came in on a tryout, and he was one of the favorite one Mike didn't want to talk about, but one of the favorites of the fans and of the chat. And he's just like Blackshear, proving that he has a path to the practice squad and more. The Bills love their defensive tackle rotations.
You love to give me crap on the UDFAs.
I'm going to give you crap on the UDFA. When I ask you about what you think of Prince Emili, and you don't give me an answer
on one, but for everyone you hit on, you have a Weidemeyer who can't even get past the first 4 people cut.
I didn't like Weidemeyer. I personally didn't like him.
You didn't, but there was a lot of other people that did. I guess the moral of the story is if you're going to trust the UDFA, make sure that he gets the Kevin Masseri stamp of approval first.
Because I think the draft status needs to match the RAS, needs to match the profile, maybe needs to match some college production. And as some of those mixtures are mixed enough that it isn't just one, or you need a little bit of everything. And some guys like Blackshear check that off for me. Millie check that off. Watermeyer, one of the worst RASs ever, just straight up a profile that is never translated. So unless you think Jalen Watermeyer is going to be the guy that translates based on years and decades of data, I guess you could possibly hang your hat on that. But there was nothing that pointed to the fact that profile at a position like offensive tackle or tight end has never translated. I need some actual proof that someone like that would translate. Hence why he was a UDFA in the first place. There might be other things that we don't know about, but for me, he was never one that stuck out to me. But back to the D-line for a second, Prince Emili and Kingsley Jonathan are two players that are definitely practice squad locks, both of them. Mike Love's making a push for it. He's putting some heat on some of the guys. He had some good pressure rates leading to strip sacks and other things, to fall downs by the quarterback. Mike Love's right in the thick of things. Right, Ben and Leslie Frazier defenses put his time in on the practice squad. Could there be a final roster spot for a Mike Love? That's what's interesting to me, that there's plenty of defensive players that we're talking about. Obviously, Tim Saddle, and we're talking about Ed Oliver needing to sit down because the offense can't run their stuff. We're talking a lot about, and then obviously Von Miller and what Greg Rousseau is going to be able to do. But there's just so much more behind them that's very interesting to me. And do you roster a guy like Brandon Bryant, who's been good? The Bills love him. Eli Anku, a guy they also love, who just came off of PUP, who's eligible to play now. Do you have a spot for them? Do you have a spot for a Prince Emili? Do you risk them on the practice squad? There's so many roster dynamics that we can talk about on a pod or on a live show, but inside the roster and inside the front office, they need to take it really seriously, because you want to stash players, and the practice squad is the minor league system of the NFL. We don't have AAA. We don't have other factors that we can go and print Prince Emili on our top of the AAA team to be the developing defensive tackle. You need to be careful with how you roster these positions, because you can already pluck from the practice squad too. So there's definitely a lot of roster dynamics that goes into some of these names that is even beyond me. That is beyond, Brandon Beane needs to hear what he's hearing across the league at different position groups from his agents saying hey man, I heard that a lot of people are interested in Elijah Griffin, and maybe that's why they released him when they did, because they wanted to give him a shot, and maybe they knew there was a chance he'd get claimed and do right by him. Because when you sign another UDFA, and this is why they played so much, Mike, on Saturday, is because when you come to Buffalo, you have a chance to make another roster. You have a chance to sign there. You have a chance to get good playing time in preseason, put film out, because they're resting their starters. They're a team that isn't the Colts, that didn't, play Matt Ryan into the second quarter of the first game, that isn't, playing their first team defense, pretty late into games, risky territory to me. And some of the things that Frank Reich was deciding to do. You can go to Buffalo and immediately put stuff on tape and look at Elijah Griffin. He gets kind of, Nick McLeod's already had a couple of chances across the league. You've had, Wild Goose get drafted there and then find a second home. You've had, lots of examples now that if you go to Buffalo and put in your best foot, then you're going to have a chance to not only make their roster, potentially a Raheem Blackshear or a Prince Emili, but you're going to have a chance to make another roster, because they let you put so much time on film for other teams to go ahead and really be a part of that, Mike. So I think that there's that whole factor of, what they're able to do from a roster standpoint with promising things to UDFAs that I didn't even think about at first. I was like, why would you want to go to the Bills? There's no path to the roster if you're a UDFA. But you get to play with a good offense, a structured team, get a lot of playing time in the preseason. It's a little bit more enticing than I thought, even as soon as 3 months ago when they were signing UDFAs.
Yeah, or even if you do go to the practice squad, they'll continue to develop you and give you future opportunities if you show up and perform. The fact that we're still talking about Cam Lewis as a quality player, and even though he was drafted, and Isaiah Hodgins, who was a 6th-round pick, he hasn't done anything in the NFL through 2 seasons, but they continue to develop him and give him opportunities to put himself out there and produce. A lot of teams, they cut bait on late round picks, UDFAs that don't have a tremendous impact right off the bat. The Bills have spent time developing their young players, which is which is going to be vital for their long-term success, because eventually some of these guys that are quality starters and even potential Pro Bowl players on the Bills roster are going to move on. They're going to get old, retire. Some are going to leave in free agency. And you're going to need players to step up and fill their voids. So the way the Bills have put together this whole system, it's been working smoothly in recent years. And let's just hope it continues to go that way, because a lot of times with these UDFAs, there is some luck involved, and even with drafting and roster construction. Brandon Beane is hit on way more than what you would expect from a GM with his first opportunity. But some of that is obviously talent. Some of it is luck. How much of it is either? Who knows? But let's just hope it continues to go the Bills' way.
Yeah. And, teams are looking out for their talent. You even had guys like Connor McDermott claimed by the Jets. You've had Jack Anderson was claimed by the Eagles last year. So there are a growing incident of Bills players that do get claimed. Prior to last year, I do think we were a little premature saying this guy's going to get claimed, that guy's going to get claimed. Now it's becoming a little bit more of a thing. Even guys like Nick McLeod and Elijah Griffin just got claimed, of some of that talent that is finally starting to get claimed across the league. So the Bills do have some tough roster decisions, Mike, but we need to elaborate on DBs, quickly here. We need to talk about the DB room and what it was able to do, as we haven't really spent too much time on it beside a Benford mention. You have obviously Trey White working his way back, and, we don't have a time frame on him quite yet. But then also you had Kaiir Elam and Benford show just complete flashes of what they're able to do. You had Neal sit, which was interesting. So we'll see if he's a roster lock. A guy that hasn't been my favorite player on the Bills team, but we'll see what the Bills think of him.
I would think he's a roster lock.
I think so too, but just like we talked about in any of the special teamers, at some point, is there some pressure on any of them? He has a cap hit that would cost more to cut him, so he is probably a lock. But you have guys like Cam Lewis who just still keep playing good. One of the best run blitzers I've seen. So at some point,
his blitz on Saturday, tackle for loss, he was explosive. So absolutely spot on with that.
And Cam Lewis is a guy that is loved by this regime. And, so do the Bills decide that this cornerback room's a little bit better than even we thought going in? And the Bills feel like they have a lot of depth. Do they have some top end corners? That's yet to see. But we've seen some flashes of it from guys in this draft class particularly. And we've definitely seen some flashes of some really good depth players. And Cam Lewis is a guy that is right with Isaiah Hodgins, kind of looking at that 53 to 55 on the current roster right now, that you think you can push forward to the practice squad like he's always been. But at some point, someone's going to take a flyer on Hodgins. Someone else is going to take a flyer on Cam Lewis.
And that's why it's such a tough decision, because a lot of fans right now that are saying, oh, keep 7 wideouts, they're not looking at who you're cutting as a result of keeping
Cam Lewis
7 wideout. A lot of fans, I think, are okay with cutting Cam Lewis. That deep down, that's what I get the feeling most fans would do. They'd rather keep a Hodgins, cut a Cam Lewis. Out of the two players, though, Cam Lewis is the one that's actually produced in NFL games. He's a guy that the Bills have had to rely on at times. So who am I to say that Hodgins has the advantage over a Cam Lewis when Cam Lewis has already shown what he can do in an NFL situation and during the regular season? I like both guys. I'm going to be of the opinion that I'm just going to trust Brandon Beane for the most part, whatever way he goes here, because he has earned the benefit of the doubt. But when it comes down to some of the final spots, you're talking about players like Isaiah Hodgins, Cam Lewis, Balen Spector, Cody Ford, some other guys of that caliber are going to be in that situation right there. And, there's going to be some good guys that are going to be gone as a result, and hopefully they can sneak onto the practice squad. But I love what I'm finding out about these DBs, because last week on the show, I had said how cornerback, with as long as Trey White is out, is one of the biggest concerns on this team heading into the regular season. Still think it is, but the first test was against the Colts, and Kaiir Elam and Christian Benford, they showed out. They came to play, and they had solid performances. Christian Benford does not look overmatched. Kaiir Elam, he's gonna have a mistake every once in a while. He's gonna get called for some penalties, just like he got a pass interference on Saturday, and that's sometimes adjusting to the NFL game from the college game. But when where this is really going to benefit the Bills is when Trey White is back 100% healthy, because your depth at corner is going to be it's going to be vastly improved. When Trey White is back and you have him at 1, and then we'll see if it's Dane Jackson or Kaiir Elam at 2. Whoever is not the 2 is still the 3. And now you know that you could have a Christian Benford lower on the depth chart as someone who's next man up waiting. And that's not even counting one of the best slot corners in the league in Taron Johnson. Now you're starting to build up that confidence, and you sneak a Cam Lewis on your practice squad, potentially, you're going to have a pretty solid cornerback room. And then obviously the safeties we've seen. And then Jaquan Johnson getting an interception on Saturday, really stepping up with that opportunity with Micah Hyde and Jordan Poyer not in the game. So we're just seeing so many young players elevate themselves. When given the opportunity, you can't help but be encouraged overall by basically everything we saw on Saturday. The only thing that you couldn't be encouraged by is the backup quarterback situation, which I do want to save some time at the very end to talk about. But
we'll save a 5 for you in a little bit for the backup cubes.
This secondary, it could be pretty solid if these youngsters continue to develop at the rate that they're currently developing.
Yeah, and I love this point here that you'd rather keep guys like Hodgins and Cam Lewis. And I agree. Like, to me, I think that's always been, I think it was Air Raid Hour that tweeted out their 53-man. And it was my favorite to this point, where I love rostering guys, talented players like Hodgins and Lewis over a 9th and 10th offensive lineman. I don't know the Bills agree with me. They have at times and they haven't at others. But I like Van Roten a lot. Bobby Hart, just absolutely not. Like, just I don't want any. I know he's been playing better at guard, and that's how they're going to justify keeping him. But at some point, he's just a practice squad to me. Like, he's a vet practice squad guy that, with all the new vet rules and all the extra practice squad spots, he's a guy you'd love to have be able to come in on a dime if you need him for depth. And I'm fine with that as a 3rd, 4th, 5th offensive guard. You know, maybe he gets some play before Butker. If nothing else, he keeps the seat warm for Ike Butker when he returns from his Achilles injury. But just straight up, like, I don't want any part of extra offensive linemen, even though it is a unit that you need to have. But to me, if you're plugging in your 9th and 10th offensive linemen, you're in trouble anyways in that specific game. I don't need to roster a million of them. The difference to me between, like, call it Cody Ford and call it Bobby Hart and others might not be that big. So to me, I'd rather roster the player. You're hoping that Bobby Hart, Luke Tenuta, some of the other guys don't have to play, because Tenuta had a rocky day. Only rookie to me that had a rocky day. Played really well against the ones, actually. And then just was horrible the rest of the day. So we need to see a little bit more from Luke Tenuta to see that he's even up for the challenge. But he did show some stuff against the ones against Indianapolis. So I need to see some more of that. But he definitely struggled down the stretch, putting to your point, we'll get into the quarterbacks in a minute, to put some of the quarterbacks in some precarious spots. But to me, I like Greg Van Roten. I think he's a really good backup offensive guard that, quite frankly, in a league that doesn't have a lot of offensive guards, that's who you're looking for to be the first player in if Bates goes down, etc. Even if Morse go down, you move Bates over. So if any of the 3 interior offensive linemen go down, to me right now, Van Roten's the guy I'd plug in, definitely over Bobby Hart and others. But I don't, with Ike Butker.
How many would you keep? Would you keep
8?
9?
I'm keeping 8.
I still think 9 is what the Bills will do, though.
I'm keeping 8 so I can keep Hodgins and Lewis. I'm keeping 8 because with Ike Butker able to come back soon, he's kind of your 9th. And if you need to pluck a 9th beyond Butker before he's back and healthy, I mean, you're going to call up the first practice squad guy. You're going to call up Bobby Hart sitting on the practice squad. You're going to call up, if it's Luke Tenuta, whoever it may be sitting there. But I don't think Greg Van Roten's a terrible option to have if you have an injury. They like, the versatility and what they've been doing with Tommy Doyle. Greg Mance is another guy that I think can play a lot of different positions for a reason. Definitely not more than 9. I don't even want to entertain 10. And definitely 8's the number for me, Mike.
I think it'll be 9. I feel like 8's a little bit on the low side for what NFL coaches would want to have. I'm not going to argue that the 9th lineman or 10th lineman are going to be better value than what a Cam Lewis, a Hodgins, a Spector might add to your roster. But normally NFL coaches are conservative by nature. And to that point, I would tend to think they're going to be safer when it comes to keeping linemen on their team.
Yeah, and you can only have 8 active on game day at offensive line. So yeah, there is definitely, if the 9th is inactive anyways, is the argument, is that player is a stash. He's a player you're stashing. So does he need to sit on your active roster to be stashed, or can the 9th offensive lineman, 10th, 11th, and 12th be sitting on the practice squad?
I mean, if it's a Bobby Hart, then you just put him on your practice squad,
right?
And you're probably safe. Some of these other guys, if you cut a Van Roden, well, then maybe someone else takes him. But it really depends who's that 9th guy, who are the guys that you're talking about trying to stash on your practice squad in that situation if they don't make your roster.
I mean, I think the stash is there, like Luke Tenuta. You're going to stash Alec Anderson. You're going to stash Bobby Hart. Those are some of the names.
Tenuta, though, I would never want this year forced into that situation. Like I look at that as strictly development. Like he's going to the practice squad, but not to hopefully play this season. Just develop, and maybe you found something.
Yeah, between Spencer Brown and Q, they both sat. We don't know who technically is a starter is at right tackle. So right there is a great depth piece either way. So you have a great piece of depth in the tackle. Tommy Doyle is another versatile piece you have. Greg Van Roten's another versatile piece you have.
And then Mans possibly.
And Mans is there too.
That'd be your 9. That'd be your 9.
That'd be your typical 9 right now.
Yeah.
And then you have Butker on his way back as this team loves Butker. From the day that they waived him, that Casey claimed him, they claimed him back immediately. They love him. So he's there on the wings to be your 8.5 offensive lineman to me. So there's definitely some roster play there at the offensive line. And it's challenging for me to put 8 or 9 right now on paper. You're right. I do believe they probably go 9. I wouldn't, though. I guess is all I'm trying to say. I think it's more likely that they do the 9, those 9 we just mentioned. I'm 8 because I have the backup of knowing Butker's coming back soon, and that you can pluck one of those guys up if you need to pluck them up to play. If you're talking about the 8th, the 9th, and the 10th offensive lineman, not a great situation anyways, for whatever game that may be. So that's ultimately what leads to my risk reward factor of like stashing a 9th offensive lineman versus stashing a player that could help you, regardless. So that's kind of what I'm kind of weighing my weighing of the options of like, if I'm playing my 9th and 10th offensive lineman, I mean, Josh Allen's got a lot to do that game or two that we're doing that. So that's, and then you have the benefit of Butker too. So that to me is kind of like someone might be hurt when Butker comes back to fill a roster spot, and that would be your 9th offensive lineman. So that's kind of to me what always is tinging in my back of my head, that they do have a backup guard that they really like, that can do a little bit of everything. On the full that they will bring back this season, whether it's week 5, 6, 7, 8, or 9, that he will be back at least at some point this season to be a key member to this backup offensive line. So I mean, you saw Cam Akers came back the same season from an Achilles injury. I don't know exactly when Butker will come back, but I believe that it isn't crazy long. I do believe you'll see him at some point, October-ish. So we'll see. And it works out for the Bills to have a great guard that they like as a backup guard, be able to come in and backfill positions when they don't have to make a roster move. So it may work to the Bills' advantage. They don't necessarily need him yet. The only time I'm praying that they have like Butker is if they do start to have some guard injuries. And I'm like, where's like Butker? But until that day, I think the Bills feel like they're in good shape with, they signed him. They know that he'll probably, they gave him a contract already. So they know that he's going to be back at some point relatively soon on the offensive line, Mike. But to kind of put this all full picture, this offensive line's blocking for the quarterback, and the quarterback's had a rough day. Matt Barkley started to play well in the fourth quarter, real well, to actually put some pressure on Case Keenum. And to me, I thought Case Keenum played a little bit better than others did. And I thought he played a little bit better than his stat line. Like, I'm sorry, I'm going to go to the grave blaming Jamison Crowder for that. You're trained as a receiver in football to watch deflection points, to make sure. I've been yelled at before for when the ball is on your chest, you're jumping or not, you don't bobble it, deflection it in the air. Josh Allen throws the ball harder than anyone in the league. You can't play slot receiver in the NFL if that's the kind of reaction that you get from a pass that's hot. Like, you're not going to get these perfect air ball, these perfect like fluff pieces of bread in your hands is what Joshua Allen, playing quarterback as the NFL, one of the best in the NFL. And you're not going to get that every single pass. You need that improv. You need to work with your quarterback. And yes, it wasn't the world's best throw. You can't have that reaction deep into your own zone with that kind of deflection into the air. Completely on Crowder. It was a little hot of a pass, little high, but nothing that should ever be deflected for an interception. I'm sorry. It was a good pass. It was to him. Like, it wasn't some garbly gook into the ground where it kicked up and all of this. It was right to him.
See,
so
it's tough when you're at the stadium, because I wasn't watching this on TV,
right?
Like yourself. At the stadium, the throw looked high. It looked off the mark. It looked like it was on Keenum. Obviously, you got a valid point. You're an NFL wide receiver. Don't let it pop up in the air, especially if that's a Keenum fastball, a Josh Allen fastball is going to be just that much quicker on you. Mm-hmm. You can't be making those mistakes in live action and costing your team field position like that. But I was going to say, you said if any scenario where an 8th and 9th linemen are being forced to play a considerable amount of game, you're going to be in a scary situation. Well, you know what? The only thing scarier than that is when you're playing quarterback and your entire line is the 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 people on your team. Mm-hmm. And that's what Case Keenum was doing on Saturday against the Colts starters. So what I found interesting in the post, not a ton of Bills fans, but some of them certainly, in the post-game conversation, I was hearing people say, you got to get rid of Keenum. He plays nothing like Josh Allen. Promote Barkley or get some other veteran to back up Josh Allen. And I know probably the majority of Bills fans don't feel that way or don't think that point of view, but that was kind of concerning to me to hear that, because was Keenum awful? Yeah, he was awful. His first interception was a little high, but Crowder could have made a better play at it. His second interception was just horrendous. Corner reading him the whole time, tried to do a back shoulder throw, and just it was read the whole way. Had the fumble that looked like it could have been an incompletion. Tough to tell from the stadium point of view. But Keenum wasn't great. There's no debating that. He is not mobile. He is not the most athletic quarterback. But what you get from him is a veteran that's been there, done that, had some success, guided the Vikings to the playoffs, is very accurate. And you're hoping that given a spot where he has to play 2-3 games, he can win you a game or two with the Bills having a great defense. I still think that's the case. Keenum was going up against the Colts regulars, and he was overmatched, and he was playing with the bottom skill players on the Bills offense. That's going to be a long day for whoever the quarterback is in that situation, especially a person that's not mobile and can't make plays on his own. Matt Barkley comes in. He's going up against the threes. He's going up against the low-end players on the Colts defense. That's when the comeback starts. When you have Isaiah Hodgins, who's a person fighting for a Bills roster spot, going up against third-string corners, fourth-string corners. When you have the Bills are starting to make plays and getting back in it. I like Barkley. He's not making the Bills roster. He's going to be stashed on the practice squad with the new practice squad rules. He was in here to be Josh's buddy, a person that they get along with, good rapport, knows the way the Bills want to run their offense, and be a friendly face around here. But he's not replacing Keenum. And when it comes to finding a veteran, good luck finding a veteran backup quarterback August 16th that can come learn your offense and be totally fine going into the regular season. There is nobody out there right now that the Bills can just magically pluck and be better. So it is going to be Keenum. I trust his history in the league, and it's going to be fine with him as the backup. He's still a talented player. And when it comes to the last point I'll make about this Keenum Barkley backup debate, when I'm losing my train of thought here. I apologize, but it's going to be fine. No one plays exactly like Josh Allen. To the argument, he's totally different than Josh Allen. Well, of course, Josh Allen's a unicorn. No one's going to be like Josh Allen. But when Case Keenum is in the game, the Bills will be just fine when he's playing with the top skill players, the top offensive line, the top running backs. It'll be okay. We can breathe a sigh of relief.
Right. And he got two hands on the ball, as you can see in this picture. I'm sorry. Like, I'm not going to call this. Was it the best pass that I've ever seen in the NFL? No. Is this what Josh Allen does, though? Quite frequently, like what he needed from Dawson Knox in the back of the end zone a couple of times last season. Yes. So I'm sorry to say, like, we can argue it till we're blue in the face. He got two hands on the football, not just one. Two hands, and quite frankly, a lot of his hands for that ball to then go pop right up into the air. I don't know. We're gonna have an issue with that I'm not gonna blame that on your team's backup quarterback, who's under pressure from the aforementioned 7 to 11 offensive linemen on your team. So to me, I have an issue that I need Jamison Crowder, the veteran, to make a play there. I or not make a play.
Hey, I
just
agree.
don't do that.
You got to make a play. All I'm saying is,
yeah,
I'm in the 300 section in the stadium.
No, I'm not blaming you. Yeah.
Crowder needs to make a play, but Keenum also needs to be more accurate. On that throw. It's an interception that never should have happened. Right. Inexcusable on both sides of that play.
Right. Yeah. No, I mean, I'll agree with that. There's definitely two to tango, and the back shoulder fade was terrible. Like, there's no if I'm not Case Keenum's agent. Like, that back shoulder fade was terrible. Like, I don't know what that was.
And guys, I'm not making excuses for Keenum. All I'm going to say is I'm going to trust his NFL career more than I'm going to trust half of the Browns preseason game.
His most relevant experience, his team was better with him as the starting quarterback than they were with Baker Mayfield. I'm sorry, I'm not saying that Baker Mayfield is amazing or as a bum, but what I am saying is the Browns were better with Case Keenum starting last year, period. And we're not talking about the Bills starting quarterback here. We're talking about a guy that needs to come in if the best player on your team gets hurt. We are in trouble anyways. Like, you're in trouble with Mitchell Biscuits. We are in trouble anyways. We're talking about Mitchell Biscuits, who, quite frankly, Steelers fans don't want him over Kenny Pickett. So, like, to me, like, there are some issues. Which backup quarterback, the Bills and Brandon Beane designated, and they traded for him because the Browns took on some of his salary to only have to pay him $3.5 million.
Hey, Kev, you're not going to like it. Eric's in the comments right now.
Yeah, well, Eric will overrule me as well. But
like I said, we're being fair. It's on both sides. The throw obviously had some issues. Yeah. It was a little bit hot. It came on Crowder, with some heat, and Crowder didn't make a play. Could Crowder have made a play? Yes, he's an NFL receiver. He absolutely could have made the play,
and possibly the team's starting slot receiver.
The throw could have been better, and Crowder could have reacted better. Ideally, something like this isn't going to happen in the regular season game. But that's the way it is. The only thing in the comments I 100% will disagree on, I will never say that Matt Barkley is better than Case Keenum. Matt Barkley has come up short every single opportunity he's had to start in the NFL outside of the one Bills game against the Jets. He has a horrendous touchdown to interception ratio. His completion percentage is not good. He has a bad quarterback rating. Case Keenum, granted, he's a career backup for the most part, guided the Vikings to the playoffs, won a playoff game against New Orleans, and has been able to win games in limited opportunities when counted on. The two are not even comparable at this time. Yes, Keenum was horrendous on Saturday. Barkley is not better. I guarantee you Barkley is not better. If you go to camp, you go to the practices, no. Barkley is third string for a reason. Great guy.
The Bills replaced him for a reason.
He is not better than Case Keenum.
It's not his first rodeo in Buffalo. The Bills replaced him with Mitchell Trubisky. The Bills have and even Case Keenum, they've designated that they needed an upgrade at a pretty important backup spot. And I think we're in pretty good shape if we're discussing like Case Keenum. I think we're in good shape if that's what we're worried about. If we're worried about if Matt Hawk has better hang time than Matt Araiza, I think we're in good shape.
This is great.
With the roster. If we're talking about like the third versus the second quarterback and technically the backup slot receiver versus if it was the backups at this minute, the backup slot receiver, or if it was the backup quarterback's fault with the 7th through 11th offensive lineman on the team, I think we're in a pretty good spot where they're competing against the ones of Indianapolis and moved the ball pretty well on the first drive. And then, yes, that deflection play that we've talked about happened and other things, and a terrible back shoulder fade happened. So, yeah, like he wasn't great, but by any stretch. But if he had to play, he's playing with Stephon Diggs. He's playing with Devin Singletary, Dawson Knox, the first offensive line. Like, yeah, sure. Like, sure, he needs good pass blocking. He's a backup quarterback. Of course he needs good pass blocking. Like, I do believe that stuff will allow him to be better than you saw against the ones of Indianapolis. So I do think with those talented players that Josh Allen has at his disposal, I do believe you would see a good version or a better version of Case Keenum when you're talking about that. And the offense, just the first series, it just looked good when Khalil Shakir was getting targets and he was, winning his one-on-one battles on the outside. So to me, I just like the fact that our biggest problem right now is if we're arguing
this
Q2,
is golden, man. This is
Q2
golden.
versus Q3, we're in a little bit of trouble if that's the case anyways.
Let's be thankful. We're talking about an offense that was honestly last year underperformed, a lot of it due to weather elements in Buffalo and not establishing a run game. And I'm not saying run the ball more. I'm saying have an effective run game when you need to. For many parts of last season in the playoffs, they got it going. You add some weapons to the offensive side of the ball. Defensively, you had the number 1 ranked defense, yards allowed, points allowed, third down conversion, and then you add one of the best pass rushers in NFL history. The things that we're arguing about, the things that we're having conversations about are so low on the list of concerns for the Bills that it's great to talk about this because we're having fun with this while other teams are looking at their quarterback situation like the Jets, wondering how are you going to win 6 games? We're in a great situation. This is fun. And as long as the Bills have Josh Allen and as long as Brandon Beane and Sean McDermott continue to construct this roster in a smart way, there should be good times in Orchard Park. And I don't see those ending anytime soon. Thank God for Josh Allen because I look at the Bills before he existed and
Josh Allen equaled Stephon Diggs. It equaled Von Miller. It equaled potentially moves like Odell Beckham Jr. if things get bad with Crowder and other receivers, injuries happen. Like it equals just that kind of talent. It equals that kind of ability. It equals that kind of winning percentage. And it just elevates your entire roster so that if Case Keenum needs to play, he's built with a quite strong defense and a pretty strong offensive unit that could hopefully help carry him at times with as good as some of these receivers are that will make the roster. So I have still some hopes that he is the guy. They can cut him free of charge, though, and save a bunch of money. If they do deem Matt Barkley's the guy, Mike, just like we said, maybe they will this season. Maybe they'll deem that that's the move they want to make. Whatever. It's not crazy if that's the decision.
Hey, I love Matt Barkley. But if it comes down to Case Keenum or Matt Barkley, I'm going to be depressed because that means I don't think the Bills are going to win a Super Bowl in either scenario. Still think they can make the playoffs, maybe. But
I still think it's possible. I think did we have a show about that?
The Super Bowl would be out of the picture. You know what? Realistically, if there was a long-term injury, and we'll wrap up the show quick in a minute here. If the Bills had an injury to Josh Allen where he were to miss the rest of the season, that's when you start potentially exploring a trade for another veteran out there. That's when you maybe reach out to San Fran if Jimmy Garoppolo is still on the spot in San Fran and see if you can acquire him. That's when you reach out to Carolina and you see if Sam Darnold is available for a late round draft pick because you're going to try to salvage your season at that point if it's a long-term situation.
Case Keenum or Beam still there, Mike, to make trades in 2 weeks.
If you have to rely on a game or two with Case Keenum or Matt Barkley, the way you run the team is going to be drastically different. It goes from being a pass team 60% of the time to you're going to run the ball probably 55, 60% of the time. You're going to keep the score low, try to let your defense keep your opponent in check and try to edge them 17-14. So realistically, you can't observe backup quarterbacks the same way you look at Josh Allen. Everything would change in a matter of seconds if Josh Allen ever went down.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with you. And DF Forever, appreciate your super chat. I absolutely can see them keeping 7 receivers. 8, I don't know. They'll definitely have to get tricky with the practice squad a little bit. But 7, as we talked definitely earlier on the show, there is a path for Hodgins to be the Bills' 7th receiver. Definitely with Kumaro on the roster too. So there's definitely a path to 7. And 8, if you consider Stevenson going to get stashed, probably. So realistically, 7 with a stashing. But I think you would see 6 or 7 with maybe some finagling with injuries and or someone on the practice squad. The Bills have done it before with injuring somebody, or not injuring someone, but putting someone on an IR position and using them later in the season. So I do believe that there's definitely path to that. And yeah, like that's exactly what the Bills would do. They'd be looking for someone like a Kyle Orton out there if something ever happened to Josh Allen. So guys, we appreciate the 140, 150 at Time Live viewers. We appreciate everybody smashing that like button for us. But we have the Bills, the Cover One film room coming now with Eric Turner. So that's going to be a great addition, Mike, right? Who's coming on the show?
Hey, Isaiah Hodgins. So that's a big guest coming off his great performance on Saturday against the Colts. We just talked about him a lot on this show. Hope he's not listening to everything I'm saying right now, or else he might not want to necessarily be on the show, because I'm critical at times, but I do like him. I am excited about the potential of him possibly making this team. As Kevin and I both said right now, it's looking 50-50. Definitely has a shot if the Bills are looking to keep 7 wide receivers, but it's going to go up against guys like Cam Lewis, Balin Spector, and possibly a 9th offensive lineman. So it's going to be a fun show. Make sure to tune in for Eric and Isaiah Hodgins, and also make sure to subscribe to the Cover One Pass premium subscription. A lot of great content on cover1.football, site with a new name right now. It gives you access to our Slack channel. A lot of conversations with the rest of the guys, Greg, Aaron Quinn, Eric, Anthony, goes on and on and on. The Air Raid Hour guys. So make sure to get to the One Pass on Cover One, and we love to interact with all of you guys.
Yeah, and look out for that new show. Like, again, Eric Turner and the entire film room crew over there, Kendall Merksey, etc., with Isaiah Hodgins, a guy that to me is on the Bills roster. So get out there, stay tuned here at the 9 o'clock hour to continue on with the Cover One Podcast Network. Smash the like button. From cover1.football, you have myself, Kevin Messeri, and Mike Bunt bringing at you on Tuesdays at 7. And we're going to be bringing a great guest roster for you as the season continues. So look out for some of those experts that we have come on, be able to break down the rest of the NFL as well with us. But stay tuned here at 9 o'clock hour from Cover One. Kevin Messeri, Mike Bunt. We'll check you guys out next Tuesday, right then, right here.
Josh Allen looking deep, going deep.
To me, talking about the Bills, what else would you rather be doing?
We're hoping to add a new dimension to the Cover One network.
Slings it deep downfield, and it's caught inside the 20.
Right now, I just want to talk about this championship. While I've never had a championship caliber team to talk about.
I want to focus more on the storylines each week. What are the big stories going on with the Bills? What are thoughts, commentary? How do these things impact Buffalo?
Deep drop. Deep throw. And it is hauled in for the touchdown.
Allen deep to the end zone and caught for a touchdown.
Play action. Allen